Chapter 3. One afternoon, a month later, Dorian Gray was sitting in the little library of Lord Henry's house in Mayfair. Lord Henry had not yet come in. He was always late. Dorian Gray was bored, and once or twice he thought of going away. At last he heard a step outside, and the door opened. "How late you are, Harry," he said. "I am afraid it is not Harry, Mr. Gray. It is only his wife." He looked around quickly and got to his feet. "I am sorry. I thought—" "I know you quite well by your photographs. I think my husband has got 17 of them." 17, Lady Henry? Well, 18 then. And I saw you with him the other night at the theatre. But here is Harry." Lord Henry smiled at them both. "So sorry I am late, Dorian." "I am afraid I must go," said Lady Harry. "Goodbye, Mr. Gray." "Goodbye, Harry. You are eating out, I suppose? I am too. Perhaps I will see you later." "Perhaps, my dear," said Lord Harry, shutting the door behind her. Then he lit a cigarette and threw himself down on the sofa. "Never marry a woman with fair hair, Dorian," he said. "Why, Harry?" "Because they are romantic." "But I like romantic people." "Never marry at all, Dorian." "I don't think I will marry, Harry. I am too much in love." "Who were you in love with?" asked Lord Henry, after a pause. "With an actress," said Dorian Gray. "How ordinary." "You would not say that if you saw her, Harry." "Who is she?" "Her name is Sybil Vane." "I've never heard of her." "No one has. People will some day, though. She is an artist." "My dear boy, no woman is an artist. Women never have anything to say, but they say it charmingly. How long have you known her?" "About 3 weeks." "And where did you meet her?" "I will tell you, Harry, but you must not laugh. After all, it was you who gave me a passion to know everything about life. For days after I met you, I searched the streets for beauty. I walked around the East End until I found a dirty little theatre. I see you are laughing. It is horrible of you." "I am not laughing, Dorian. Go on with your story." "The play was Romeo and Juliet. At first I was annoyed at the thought of seeing Shakespeare in such a terrible place. And when a fat old gentleman came out as Romeo, I nearly walked out. But then I saw Juliet. Harry, she was the loveliest thing I had ever seen in my life." "When did you meet her?" "I went back the next night and the night after that. On the third evening, I waited for her outside the theatre." "What was she like?" "Sybil? Oh, she was shy and gentle. She is only 17, and there is something of a child in her. She said to me, 'You look like a prince. I must call you Prince Charming.'" "Miss Sybil knows how to flatter you." "Oh, you don't understand her, Harry. She thinks that I am like a person in Shakespeare. She knows nothing of life. Sybil is the only thing I care about." "That is the reason, I suppose, that you never have dinner with me now. I thought it might be something romantic." "My dear Harry, we eat together every day," said Dorian. "You always come very late." "Well, I have to see Sybil play," he cried. "Can you have dinner with me tonight, Dorian?" He shook his head. "Tonight she is Ophelia," he answered, "and tomorrow night she will be Juliet." "When is she Sybil Vane?" "Never." "That's good." "Oh, how horrible you are! But when you see her, you will think differently. I want you and Basil to come and watch her tomorrow night. You are certain to recognize that she is wonderful." All right. Tomorrow evening. Will you see Basil before then, or shall I write to him?
Dear Basil, I haven't seen him for a week. It is rather horrible of me, as he sent me my portrait a few days ago. I love looking at it. Perhaps you should write to him. I don't want to see him alone. He says things that annoy me. He gives me good advice.
Lord Henry smiled. People are very fond of giving away advice they need themselves.
Oh, Basil is a good man, but I don't think he really understands about art and beauty. Since I have known you, Harry, I have discovered that.
Basil, my dear boy, puts everything that is charming in him into his work.
I must go now, Harry. My Juliet is waiting for me. Don't forget about tomorrow. Goodbye.
As Dorian left the room, Lord Henry began to think about what he had just learnt. Certainly few people had ever interested him so much as Dorian Gray. Yet the mad worship of this actress did not make him annoyed or jealous. He was pleased by it. It made the boy more interesting to study. Later that night, when he arrived home from dinner, Lord Henry saw a telegram on the table near the door. He opened it and read that Dorian Gray was going to marry Sybil Vane. Chapter 4. "I suppose you have heard the news, Basil," said Lord Henry the following evening. They were in the dining-room of the Bristol Hotel. "No, Harry," answered the artist, giving his hat and coat to the waiter. "What is it?" "Dorian Gray is going to be married," said Lord Henry, watching him as he spoke. Hallward frowned. "Dorian going to be married?" he cried. "Impossible." "It is perfectly true." "To whom?" "To some little actress." "But it would be absurd for him to marry someone like that." "If you want to make him marry this girl, tell him that, Basil. He is sure to do it then. Whenever a man does a completely stupid thing, it is always for a good reason." "I hope this girl is good, Harry." "Oh, she is better than good. She is beautiful," said Lord Henry. "Dorian says that she is beautiful, and he is not often wrong about these things. Your portrait has helped him understand beauty in others. We are to see her tonight, if that boy doesn't forget." "But how can Dorian marry an actress, Harry? It is absurd," cried the painter, walking up and down the room, biting his lip. "Dorian Gray falls in love with a beautiful actress who plays Juliet. He asks her to marry him. Why not? I hope that Dorian Gray marries this girl and worships her for 6 months. Then he can suddenly become fascinated by another woman." "You don't mean a word of that, Harry. I know you don't really want Dorian Gray's life to be spoiled. You are much better than you pretend to be." Lord Henry laughed. "The reason we all like to think so well of others is because we are afraid for ourselves. But here is Dorian himself. He will tell you more than I can."
"My dear Harry, my dear Basil, you must both congratulate me," said the boy, throwing off his coat and shaking each of his friend's hands. "I have never been so happy. Of course, it is sudden. All the best things are. And yet it seems to me to be the one thing I have been looking for all my life."
"I hope you will always be very happy, Dorian," said Hallward. "But why did you not tell me? You told Harry."
"There really is not much to tell," cried Dorian. "Last night I went to see her again. After, when we were sitting together, there came into her eyes a wonderful look. It was something I had never seen there before. We kissed each other. I can't describe to you what I felt at that moment."
"Have you seen her today?" asked Lord Henry.
Dorian Gray shook his head. I have left her in Shakespeare's forest. I will find her in his garden."
"At what exact point did you use the word marry, Dorian? And how did she answer? Perhaps you forgot all about it."
"My dear Harry, it was not a business meeting. I told her I loved her. The whole world is nothing to me compared to her."
"But, my dear Dorian—"
Hallward put his hand on Lord Henry's arm. "Don't, Harry. You have annoyed Dorian. He is not like other men. He would never harm anyone."
Lord Henry looked across the table. "Dorian is never annoyed with me," he answered.
Dorian Gray laughed. "When I am with Sybil Vane, I don't believe in anything you have taught me. I forget all your fascinating, terrible ideas."
"And those are?" asked Lord Henry, helping himself to some salad.
"Oh, your ideas about life, your ideas about love, your ideas about pleasure, all your ideas, Harry."
"Pleasure is the only thing worth having ideas about," he answered in his slow, musical voice. "When we are happy, we are always good. But when we are good, we are not always happy."
"I know what pleasure is," cried Dorian Gray. "It is to worship someone."
"That is certainly better than when someone worships you."
"Harry, you are terrible. I don't know why I like you so much. Let us go down to the theatre. When you see Sybil, you will change your ideas."
They got up and put on their coats. The painter was silent and thoughtful. He felt very sad. Dorian Gray would never again be to him all that he had been in the past. Life had come between them. When he arrived at the theatre, it seemed to Hallward that he had grown years older. Chapter 5. The theatre was crowded that night. It was terribly hot, and there were young people shouting to each other from across seats. Women were laughing loudly, and their voices sounded horrible. People were eating oranges and drinking from bottles. "What a place to find the perfect girl in," said Lord Henry.
"Yes," answered Dorian Gray. "It was here I found her. When you see her as Juliet, you will forget everything. These ugly people become quite different when she appears."
"I understand what you mean, Dorian," said the painter, "and I believe in this girl. Anyone you love must be wonderful."
"Thanks, Basil," answered Dorian Gray. "I knew that you would understand me. In a few minutes you will see the girl who I am going to give my life to, the girl who I have given everything that is good in me." Then Sybil appeared. The crowd shouted and called her name.
Yes, she was certainly lovely to look at, Lord Henry thought.
Basil Hallward jumped to his feet excitedly.
Dorian Gray sat staring at her like he was in a dream. "Charming, charming," cried Lord Henry. A quarter of an hour later, Lord Henry whispered to Hallward, "She is one of the loveliest girls I have ever seen, but she is a terrible actress." Dorian Gray's face turned white as he watched her speak. She was so different tonight. Now she was not Juliet, but a very bad actress who did not understand Shakespeare's words. Even the crowd became bored and began to talk loudly. The only person who did not seem to notice was the actress herself. Lord Henry got up from his chair and put on his coat. "She is beautiful, Dorian," he said, "but she can't act. Let's go."
"I am going to stay until the end," answered the boy in a cold voice. "I am awfully sorry that I have made you waste an evening, Harry. I apologize to you both."
"My dear Dorian,
"Perhaps Miss Vane is ill," said Hallward. "We will come some other night." "Come to the club with Basil and myself. We will smoke cigarettes and drink to the beauty of Sybil Vane. She is beautiful. What more do you want?" "Go away, Harry," cried the boy. "I want to be alone. Can't you see my heart is breaking?" Hot tears came to his eyes as Lord Henry and Hallward left the theatre. When it was over, Dorian Gray rushed to see Sybil Vane. The girl was standing there alone, with a look of extraordinary happiness on her face. "How badly I acted tonight, Dorian," she cried. "Horribly," he answered, staring at her. "It was terrible. Are you ill? Why did you make me suffer like that?" The girl smiled. "Dorian, don't you understand?" "Understand what?" he asked angrily. "Why I was so bad tonight. Why I will always be bad. Why I will never act well again." "You are ill, I suppose. When you are ill, you shouldn't act. My friends were bored. I was bored." "Dorian, Dorian," she cried. "Before I knew you, acting was the one important thing in my life. It was only in the theatre that I lived. I thought that it was all true. Tonight, for the first time in my life, I saw that I was playing at love. Our love for each other is the only true love. Take me away with you, Dorian. I don't want to be an actress any more." He threw himself down on the sofa and turned away his face. "You have killed my love," he said quietly. Then he jumped up and went to the door. "My God, how mad I was to love you! What a fool I have been! You are nothing to me now. I will never see you again. I will never think of you. I will never speak to you again." The girl went white. "You are not serious, Dorian. You are acting," she whispered, putting her hand on his arm. He pushed her back. "Don't touch me," he cried. Then he turned and left the room. After walking the streets of London all night, he arrived home just after sunrise. As he passed through the library, he saw the portrait that Basil Hallward had painted of him. He stared at it in surprise and walked on into his bedroom. He took his coat off and stood next to his bed. A few moments later he returned to the picture and looked at it closely. In the poor light the face seemed to have changed a little. Now the mouth looked cruel. It was certainly strange. He walked to the window and opened the curtains. The light changed the room, but the face stayed the same. In fact, the sunlight made the mouth look even crueler. Going back to his bedroom, he found a small mirror that had been a present from Lord Henry. He looked at his real face and saw no sign of cruelty. What did it mean? He threw himself into a chair and began to think. Suddenly he remembered what he had said in Basil Hallward's house the day the picture had been finished. Yes, he remembered it perfectly. He had asked that the painting grow old so that he himself could remain young. But such things were impossible. It was terrible even to think about them. And yet there was the picture in front of him. There was the cruelty in the mouth. Cruelty. Had he been cruel? No, why think about Sybil Vane? She was nothing to him now. But the picture, what was he to say of that? It held the secret of his life and told his story. It had taught him to love his own beauty. Would it teach him to hate his own soul? Would he ever look at it again? He would save himself. He would not see Lord Henry again. He would go back to Sybil Vane, marry her, and try to love her again. She had suffered more than he had. Poor child. He had been selfish and cruel to her. They would be happy together. His life with her would be beautiful and pure. He got up from his chair and covered the portrait. How horrible, he said to himself, and he walked across to the window and opened it. When he stepped out onto the grass, he took a deep breath. He thought only of Sybil. The birds that were singing in the garden seemed to be telling the flowers about her. Chapter 6. It was nearly 1 o'clock the next afternoon when he woke up. His servant brought him a cup of tea and some letters. One of them was from Lord Henry, and had been brought by hand that morning. He put it to one side. He went into the library for breakfast, feeling perfectly happy. Then he saw the open window and the covered portrait. Was it all true, or had it just been a dream? But he remembered that cruel mouth so clearly. Dorian Gray sent his servant away and locked all the doors. Then he pulled the cover off the painting and saw himself face to face. It was true. The portrait had changed. For hours he did not know what to do or think. Finally, he went over to the table and wrote a passionate letter to the girl he had loved. He asked her to forgive him for the terrible things he had said to her. Suddenly, he heard a knock on the door, and he heard Lord Henry's voice outside. "My dear boy, I must see you. Let me in at once." He made no answer, but remained quite still. The knocking continued and grew louder. Yes, it was better to let Lord Henry in. He would explain to him the new life he was going to lead. He jumped up, covered the picture, and opened the door. "I am sorry about it all, Dorian," said Lord Henry as he entered. "But you must not think too much about it." "Do you mean about Sybil Vane?" asked the boy. "Yes, of course," answered Lord Henry, sitting down and slowly pulling off his yellow gloves. "It is terrible, but you are not to blame. Tell me, did you go behind and see her after it was over?" "Yes." "I felt sure that you had. Did you have an argument?" "I was cruel, Harry, terribly cruel. But it is all right now. I am not sorry for anything that has happened. It has taught me to know myself better." "Oh, Dorian, I am so glad that you see it that way." "I want to be good, Harry. I don't want my soul to be ugly. I am going to marry Sybil Vane." "Marry Sybil Vane?" cried Lord Henry, standing up and staring at him in surprise. "But, my dear Dorian—" "Yes, Harry, I know what you are going to say. Something horrible about getting married. Don't say it. Sybil will be my wife." "Your wife? Dorian, didn't you get my letter? I wrote to you this morning." "Your letter? Oh, yes, I remember. I have not read it yet, Harry." "You know nothing yet, then?" "What do you mean?" Lord Henry walked across the room and sat down next to Dorian Gray. Taking both his hands in his own, he held them. "Dorian," he said, "my letter was to tell you that Sybil Vane is dead." A cry of pain came from the boy's lips, and he jumped to his feet. "Dead? Sybil dead? It is not true. It is a horrible lie." "It is true, Dorian," said Lord Henry. "It is in all the morning newspapers. The police will be asking questions, and you must keep your name out of any scandal. Things like that make a man fashionable in Paris, but in London they are a disaster for any gentleman. I suppose they don't know your name at the theatre?"
If they don't, it is all right. Did anyone see you going round to her room?"
Dorian did not answer for a few moments. Finally, he said in a strange voice, "Harry, did you say that the police are asking questions? What did you mean by that? Did Sybil— Oh, Harry, this is terrible."
"I am sure that it was not an accident, though it must be described that way officially. She swallowed something horrible they use at theatres."
"Harry, Harry, it is terrible," cried the boy.
"Yes, it is very sad, of course, but it is nothing to do with you. Come with me to dinner, and after we will go to the theatre."
"So I have murdered Sybil Vane," said Dorian Gray, half to himself. "Yet the roses are not less lovely. The birds still sing happily in my garden. And tonight I will have dinner with you and go to the theatre. How extraordinary life is. My first passionate love letter was to a dead girl. Yet why is it that I cannot feel this tragedy as much as I want to? I don't think I am heartless. Do you?"
"You have done too many foolish things in the last fortnight to be heartless, Dorian," answered Lord Henry, with his sweet, sad smile.
The boy frowned. "I don't like that explanation, Harry," he said. "But I am glad you don't think I am heartless."
"A woman has killed herself for the love of you," said Lord Henry. "That is very beautiful."
They were silent. The evening darkened in the room. After some time, Dorian Gray looked up. "How well you know me. But we will not talk again of what has happened. It has been something wonderful. That is all. Now I have to dress, Harry. I feel too tired to eat anything. But I will join you later at the theatre." As Lord Henry closed the door behind him, Dorian rushed to the portrait and tore off the cover. No, there was no further change in the picture. It had received the news of Sybil Vane's death before he had known of it himself. Tears came to his eyes as he remembered her. He brushed them away and looked again at the picture. He felt the time had come to choose. Or had he already chosen? Yes, life had decided that for him. The portrait was going to carry his shame. That was all. An hour later, he was at the theatre, and Lord Henry was sitting beside him.